Walking to work. Older man walking towards my direction yelled effing Chinese disease and suddenly stepped near me and spat at me, hitting my coat, scarf, and face. A lot of disgusting saliva.
I was walking in the park when some kids from my school started spitting on me because they said it was the only way to clean me of COVID-19. They started shoving me and spit some more and left.
Some guys from my high school followed me home in their car. They honked very loudly at me and pulled up next to me. And when I looked up, they threw things at me from their car, pretended to cough on me and said, "Ching chong, you have Chinese virus." Then they drove away, rolling up their windows.
Colleague of 4 years, who is a bit of a bully, yells at me, "Hey, this is your fault. It's your people that brought this over," followed by demeaning laughter.
My kids were at the park with their dad, who's white. An older white man pushed my 7-year-old daughter off her bike and yelled at my husband to take your hybrid kids home because they're making everyone sick.
A non-white girl and her grandmother were chanting "Born in the USA" while we were all leaving the store. As they're looking at us, the girl says she is afraid of the Chinese because they have a disease, to which her grandmother says that we should all go back to China. When we parted ways to go to our own cars, the little girl was yelling "Ching Chong Chinaman" all the way to her car.
A white man assaulted me by throwing his drink in my face and shouting things like they should all be banned and they're all disgusting.
I was shouted and harassed by the cashier, workers, as well as the customers at the store to get out of the store. You Chinese bring the virus here and you dare asking people to keep social distance guidelines?
A current graduate student posted, "There's a special place in hell for the effing Chinese in the archaic culture." Trump's description of COVID-19 as a Chinese virus is the most accurate thing he has ever said. I wish he had wiped the whole country off the planet.
Group of people talking. They saw me. I was wearing a mask. One told everyone to shut up, there's one. They all looked at me and moved away. Made sure I didn't follow them.
I'm posting for my dad, a 71-year-old Korean adoptee. Yesterday, he was chased out of a rural convenience store after asking to use the restroom while traveling along I-5 through California.
I would like to begin.
The Chinese coronavirus is a major effect in the life.
Hi, I'm Professor Russell Jeung, Chair of Asian American Studies at San Francisco State University. Today I'd like to talk about how Asian Americans are combating racism in the age of the coronavirus. We're about a month in the shelter-in-place policies, and Asian American discrimination is at its peak, and we're worried that it may even grow higher. So, as you look at the types of discrimination, in the first 4 weeks that we started our reporting site, we've received over 1,500 accounts from Asian Americans talking about their firsthand experience of discrimination. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. It's widespread and pervasive. And as you look at the statistics, verbal harassment and shining make up the largest percentages, but they're not just microaggressions. They're actually really harrowing stories of people getting yelled at, attacked viciously, with children and elderly present. So it's just harrowing and palpable how hate-filled these incidents are. Another large percentage of the cases are civil rights infringements, being barred from establishments, not being able to use public transit. And 16% of the cases are actually hate crimes, physical assaults, or in a particular aspect of this pandemic, Asians are getting spat upon and coughed upon. So when you get spat upon and coughed upon, that's actually a public health threat and can even constitute terrorism. One person was actually arrested for terrorism for coughing on a white person. Now this is happening hundreds of times to Asian Americans, so we could say that's even mass terrorism against Asian Americans. If you look at the reasons for discrimination, most of all, people say it's because of their racial background. 70% of the people reporting are not actually Chinese, but Asians of other ethnicities. So people aren't just attacking Chinese for the source of the virus, but they're saying if anybody looks like they're Chinese, they're racially profiling them and attacking them. Another racialized aspect of the issue is wearing a face mask. So in 17% of the cases, Asian Americans are saying that wearing the face mask was a reason why they were attacked. Or if they were not wearing the face mask, they were attacked. So we can't win either way. Finally, the sites of discrimination, most of them were at businesses. Because we're sheltered in place, that's where most confrontations take place. Initially, a lot of confrontations and interpersonal attacks were at schools and in parks and in public transit. But now that we're sheltered in place, most incidents are occurring at businesses. So this anti-Asian racism is really widespread. If you ask any Asian American, they probably know a family member or friend who's been experiencing it. And so why is it now that we're experiencing all this anti-Asian racism? It's just a virus, and why is there such a close association of this virus with Asian Americans? I think 5 factors are related to the association of the people with this disease, and I'm going to talk about the political rhetoric involved, the media representations, the historical context, and how this disease then gets racialized and then Asian Americans get racially profiled. So the major factor of what's causing the association of Chinese people with this virus is the political rhetoric of our day.
I would like to begin by announcing some important developments in our war against the Chinese virus. We'll be invoking...
President Trump has been insisting on calling coronavirus or COVID-19 the Chinese virus. Even when he was asked not to, even when the World Health Organization says it's improper to, even when he knew Asian Americans were getting attacked, he insisted on calling it the Chinese virus. This has become a persistent theme of the Republican Party, especially during this campaign time, to scapegoat China and to place responsibility of the disease on China. Maybe it's to avoid taking responsibility themselves, maybe it's to rile their base, but it's clear Republicans are using this as a tactic to China bash and to draw attention away from what's going on. What's most scary to me is that now US-China relations are going to become part of the presidential campaign, and the ads are becoming even more hate-filled and viral. One person running for Congress actually said in her ad, "China is poisoning our people," as if this was an intentional attack by China and that the Chinese people who died in Wuhan were just sort of pawns in this international game. The other key factor is how the media has been representing the disease. If you look at this op-ed by the Wall Street Journal, it says China is a real sick man of Asia, and associated is a picture of a Chinese person with a mask. So over and over again in the media, initially the disease was associated with China, and you've seen it represented with Chinese people in masks. So over and over again, as you see those media representations, people make that quick link between the virus and the country. What's even more widespread, though, are social media representations that link China to the virus. One viral meme that went on early was a picture of Chinese people eating bats. And with social media, those images and those memes and those posts circulate a lot faster and a lot more often than other mainstream media. So youth in particular are especially affected. On Instagram, what was posted was a party at the University of Albany, and they had a coronavirus party. And again, the depiction is of Chinese people wearing masks with Corona beer, but the Chinese people were dying in that Instagram post. So you have the political rhetoric coupled with the media representations, and that all goes along with the historic stereotype of Asians being the yellow peril. This has been around since the 19th century and has been used to depict Asians as being a nameless, faceless horde that were going to come and dominate the West, especially with their diseases. This stereotype of Asians being disease-ridden, pagan, was used to exclude Asians and was one of the primary factors for the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. Disease was also used later on, at the beginning of the 20th century. Another disease that was blamed on Chinese was the bubonic plague in 1900. When it first arrived on American shores, health officials actually burned down Honolulu Chinatown, leaving 7,000 people homeless, and ironically spreading the rats, who spread the disease even more. In San Francisco, they quarantined all of Chinatown, keeping 30,000 Chinese inside its geographical region, allowing whites to leave, but keeping Chinese in to get sick. They actually barbed wired and roped off the area to keep Chinese in. Disease was also used in Angel Island as a reason to detain Chinese for longer periods of time, and then eventually to exclude them if they weren't seen to be healthy and fit. So what's happening, as you can see, is COVID-19 is being racialized, that a neutral disease is being associated by race and having associated meanings. What happens is that you have a general truth, like the source of the virus is in China, but then what happens is through political rhetoric, the virus is connected to China and then to Chinese people. With lots of media representations of Chinese people in face masks, that further ingrains this implicit bias, this thinking that the virus is associated with Chinese people. Finally then, what happens is that Chinese people in masks are then equated with the disease, and people make automatic assumptions that this disease comes from China, this disease is related to Chinese people, and Chinese people are more likely to be infected. This then leads to the racial profiling of Asian Americans. What happens is that people have a racial schema, which is the way we think and the way we're sort of hardwired to see patterns in society and to see patterns in natural phenomena. So what happens is, because of all these close associations between Chinese people and the disease, when people see other Chinese or people who look like Chinese, again, they have this sort of automatic assumption that person is diseased. They also, because of their racial schema, are primed to notice the mask. And so if people see Asian people in masks, they'll notice it, and again, they'll think of the disease. With our schema then, what we do is we make automatic assumptions. We make quick reactions to see who that person is and if they're a threat to us. So in the United States, we're socialized to notice three things: age, gender, and race. And when we notice someone's race, we automatically come up with a stereotype that we use to operate. In fact, everybody, especially in the United States, have these racial schemas. It's not saying that everybody is racist, but we are saying that people have racial lenses by which they perceive the world and by which they react to the world. What happens now is that we have an automatic behavioral response too. If we feel threatened, like by a disease, then we'll go into flight or fight mode. The flight mode is people are shunning Asian people, and the fight mode is that people are attacking Asian people. So you could explain the responses that people are having in discriminating against Asian Americans through the social psychology process. Now this has huge impacts on the Asian American community. I just want to articulate some of them, of how Asian Americans are being impacted by this racism. We saw a pattern in the news content analysis that there would be a lot of xenophobic statements by politicians, and then the next stage you'll see a lot of people then boycotting Asian businesses. So Chinese restaurants are seeing a 50 to 70% decline in business initially before shelter in place. This has serious consequences on the Asian American community because a lot of us rely on the ethnic enclaves markets and the businesses in order to make our livelihoods. Another consequence of the racism is that we're facing interpersonal attacks, the physical assault that I mentioned. Again, we have over 150 accounts of these hate crimes where people actually were physically assaulted. A lot of it happened in public transit initially because people were in close confrontation. The FBI is now investigating a knife attack on a family in Texas at Sam's Club. They weren't Chinese, they were refugees from Burma, but they were attacked from behind, and two youth, 2 years old and 6 years old, were actually slashed in the head for being mistaken to be Chinese. In Australia, a man actually already died because when he had a heart attack, people wouldn't stop to help him. They thought he was infected by the coronavirus and they were too scared to do anything. On the individual level, this racism really impacts Asian American youth and the entire community. As Asian Americans get bullied, as Asian Americans get stigmatized, they begin to see themselves the way others perceive them. So if others perceive them as a threat, if others perceive them as diseased, if others perceive them as stigmatized, then Asian Americans may internalize those perspectives and also feel like, wow, I would want to shun my Asian side too. I want to avoid that too. And so they may have higher rates of depression, higher rates of stress, higher rates of anxiety. In fact, as you could see from this study, already 80 to 90% of Asian Americans fear experiencing racial bias. This will have long-term impacts on our mental health and our actual physical health as well. So what are Asian Americans doing about this? As I said before, there's been a pattern in America's racist history that when a disease comes, Asians are scapegoated and then quarantined, excluded, detained. But part of that history too is a pattern of Asian Americans resisting this type of racism, combating this type of discrimination. In the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, over 10,000 Chinese filed appeals in court to protest. In addition, they had a major boycott of American goods, and actually they engaged in the largest case of mass civil disobedience of the time. 97% of Chinese in the US engaged in mass civil disobedience, and they refused government directions to register as aliens. So what should we do? First of all, we have to challenge the misinformation that's being put out. Even our CDC has said the number one rumor, the number one falsehood is that Chinese and Asians are to be blamed for this disease. If you see in this on their website, the first fact they want to put out is that COVID-19 doesn't discriminate against any race or ethnicity, and so neither should we. One thing that we need to do as an Asian American community, if political rhetoric is the primary cause of this xenophobia and racism, then we have to challenge it, hold accountable our government officials and our elected officials for their hate speech. And we see that happening already. A lot of our Asian Pacific Islander legislators, our congressional members, our senators are taking strong stands and denouncing anti-Asian hate.
Times like this is not a time to be a racist or to discriminate.
Coronavirus affects all of us.
Blaming people doesn't get us anywhere.
Asian Americans are combating racism on the level of the media. We have our own movements on social media like hashtag wash the hate or hashtag racism is a virus. And we also seen a lot of our Asian American celebrities and athletes coming out strongly to condemn this violence and discrimination against Asian Americans. Our community nonprofits and civil rights organizations are also resisting this racism. I'm working with Chinese for Affirmative Action in San Francisco and Asian Pacific Planning and Policy Council in Los Angeles to create the Stop AAPI Hate Center that's collecting all these reports. We're using your individual reports to develop a collective understanding of what's going on and to monitor the hate incidents that Asian Americans are experiencing it. By collecting this type of data, we're able to make strategic interventions in the areas where we're facing discrimination. For example, we're calling on Governor Newsom in California to lead a task force to really pay attention to the areas where we're facing racism. Whether it's in schools where we need ethnic studies, whether it's in businesses where we need the right to safe accommodations, or whether it's in our parks where we should be able to play freely. We're calling on the government to be responsible for our issues. Anti-Asian racism isn't a problem of Asian Americans. It's not an Asian American issue. It's an issue that others have with us. It's other people's problems, and so we need to hold government accountable to deal with this. If you're a person who has been harassed, or if you're witnessing Asian Americans facing discrimination, we really encourage you to lift up your voice and to report these incidents of bias and hate. Again, by gathering our collective voice, we could provide resources to the community and make strategic interventions. I want to close with 3 main points. We are just 1 month into the shelter in place, and we are beginning to see more attack ads against China, blaming them for this being the source of the virus. The FBI has warned against a surge of hate crimes against Asian Americans, but we've already seen the surge. We've already experienced a surge of hate crimes. What I'm concerned about is as the political rhetoric continues, as we continue to stay longer sheltered in place, as the economy gets worse, and as more deaths mount because of COVID-19, anti-Asian hate will grow. And so we have to be even more vigilant. We have to step up the fight even more to resist this hate and to encourage people to have empathy and patience and tolerance during this critical moment. The second thing we really need to do is recognize that it's not just Asian Americans who are suffering at this particular time, but you could see the clear structural racism in the United States. African Americans are being infected at rates much higher than the rest of the community. The Latinx community has been the hardest hit economically. And again, Asian Americans face multiple stressors. We're afraid of getting the disease, we're afraid of our family getting the pandemic, we're afraid of our economic livelihood being threatened, and now we're also threatened by being bullied and attacked. So we need to work together with other communities in solidarity as we recognize how racial profiling and racism operates in the US. So lastly, I want to encourage the Asian American community to organize against this political rhetoric that is so dangerous, to work together with other communities of color to challenge the hate, and to organize ourselves in our own institutions, whether they're community-based nonprofits, whether they're unions like I am doing, or with faith-based organizations. We need to get together to stand in solidarity against this disease and against the racism that accompanies it. Thank you for joining, and please join us in our fight against anti-Asian racism.